Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Union Arena Match. One Punch Man versus Bleach. Which is the best anime? We have Ichigo and Renji versus Saitama and Genos. Who will be the best? Our opponents Rochambeau to see who goes first. Player 1 on the left, player 2 on the right. Player 1 goes first, taps an action point and plays Chad. Passes turn to player 2. Player 2 draws a card and takes 2 action points. Player 2 taps an action point to play Bomb for 0 energy. Player 2 taps another action point to play Silver Fang and passes turn to player 1. Player 1 starts their turn by drawing a card and taking another action point onto the field. Player 1 starts their turn by drawing a card and taking another action point onto the field. Player 1 taps 2 action points to play 1 Renji onto the energy line and a Shino onto the energy line. Passes turn to player 2. Player 2 starts their turn by playing another bomb onto the energy line. Player 2 then plays Saitama onto the energy line and passes turn to player 1. Player 1 draws a card and takes their 3rd action point onto the field. Player 1 taps an action point and plays Ichago onto the energy line. Player 1 taps an energy and plays Renji onto the front line. Player 1 passes turn to player 2. Player 2 draws a card and untaps action points. Player 2 taps an action point and plays Genos into the front line. Player 2 taps an action point and plays Saitama onto the energy line, replacing Bomb. Player 2 taps another action point to play Silver Fang onto the front line and ends turn. Player 1 draws a card and untaps action points. Player 1 thinks a little bit. Player 1 taps 2 action points to play Renji onto the front line. Renji has an effect that when played, choose up to 1 character on your opponent's front line. It loses 3000 BP into the end of the turn. Player 1 chooses player 2's Genos and sidelines him. Player 1 taps an action point and plays a Getsu to get rid of player 2's Silver Fang on the front line. Player 1 attacks player 2 with Renji. Player 2 takes the damage. Player 1 chooses the life card. No trigger is done to player 1. Player 1 passes turn to player 2. Player 2 draws a card and untaps action points. Player 2 activates Saitama's main ability. Place 1 card from your hand to the sideline to move to the front line if the front line is not full. Player 2 attacks player 1 with Saitama. Player 1 takes the damage. Player 2 chooses the life. There was no trigger affecting player 2. Saitama has an effect after the attack phase. It moves back to the energy line. Player 2 moves Saitama back to the energy line and passes turn to player 1. Player 1 draws a card and untaps action points. Player 1 taps an action point to raid with Renji. Renji has an ability when played. You may play 4 cards from your sideline in your removal area. If you do, choose up to 1 character in your opponent's front line. It loses 3000 BP until the end of the turn, but player 2 does not have a character card on their front line. Player 1 taps an action point to activate Renji's ability to give him double damage. Player 1 moves to attack phase and swings with Renji, causing 2 damage and choosing 2 life cards from player 2. Player 2's first life has a trigger allowing him to draw a card. Player 2's second life had a trigger allowing him to draw another card. Player 1 swings at player 2 with its other Renji. Player 2 takes the damage. Player 2's life has a trigger allowing him to draw another card. Player 1 swings at player 2 with their 3rd Renji. Player 2 takes the damage. Player 2's life has a trigger. but unfortunately cannot activate the trigger because player 2 has no characters on the front line. Player 1 ends turn, player 2 draws a card and untaps action points. Player 2 taps an action point and play Terrible Tornado onto the front line. Player 2 taps an action point to raid Terrible Tornado onto the front line. Terrible Tornado has an ability: if you used an event card this turn, this character gains impact. Also, if on the front line, reduce the AP cost of the next event card you use from your hand this turn by 1. Player 2 plays a hero, allowing him to untap 2 of his action points. Player 2 taps an action point to play another Terrible Tornado onto the front line. Player 2 moves to attack phase and attacks player 1 with Terrible Tornado. Player 1 takes the damage. Player 1's life card has no trigger. Player 2 passes turn. Player 1 draws a card and untaps action points. Player 1 taps an action point to play a Getsu to get rid of player 2's Terrible Tornado. Player 1 taps 2 action points to play Renji onto the front line that has an ability: when played, choose a character on your opponent's front line and it gets minus 3000 BP. Player 1 chooses player 2's Terrible Tornado, removing it from the field. Player 1 moves to attack phase, attacking player 2 with Renji. Player 2 takes the damage. Player 1 finishes the battle and attacks player 2 with the rest of his battle cards. Bleach is the winner of this match. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please leave a like, comment, subscribe if you're not subscribed, and have a good day.